Every dawn in the quiet hills of Tennessee, the Thompson kitchen begins with a hearty, species-appropriate feast for their littlest family member. Little Spud, the Bobcat kitten, ears perked, whiskers quivering, stands on his hind legs atop the speckled granite countertop, his spotted paws barely steady. Spud eagerly paws at a stainless steel bowl filled with a veterinarian-formulated raw diet: ground rabbit, turkey, and chicken enriched with taurine and essential vitamins, while Emily places a second dish of finely chopped quail and salmon oil nearby. But his story didn't begin with salmon oil and warm blankets. It began with a desperate, lonely cry in the vast wilderness. And this is the story of Spud, the little bobcat who never gave up on fate, rising from a starving orphan to Tennessee's most gourmet bobcat. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Every dawn in the Thompson kitchen began not with the gentle hum of a coffee maker, but with a series of sounds more suited to the wild heart of the Appalachian Mountains that cradled their small Tennessee home. First, a tiny, surprisingly robust murr-row, followed by the soft thump-thump of padded paws galloping down the hallway. Then, the scrabbling sound of claws finding purchase on the leg of a kitchen stool. For Jack and Emily Thompson, this was their new, chaotic, and utterly beloved alarm clock. On this particular sun-drenched spring morning, little Spud the Bobcat kitten, ears perked, whiskers quivering with intent, was already orchestrating his breakfast symphony. He stood on his hind legs atop the speckled granite countertop, his oversized paws, dappled with leopard-like spots, barely steady. With the intense focus of a seasoned predator, Spud eagerly pawed at a stainless steel bowl. Inside was a feast fit for a tiny king of the forest. A veterinarian-formulated raw diet of ground rabbit, turkey, and chicken, richly enriched with the taurine and essential vitamins his wild body craved. Emily, her silver hair tied back in a practical bun, smiled as she placed a second, smaller dish of finely chopped quail and a glistening drizzle of salmon oil nearby. "A little something for variety, my handsome boy," she cooed, her voice the gentle rumble that always seemed to soothe him. Jack, a man whose large frame and weathered hands spoke of a life spent outdoors, moved with a surprising gentleness. He poured a measured scoop of kitten milk replacer into a shallow saucer, the sound of the liquid hitting the ceramic causing Spud to arch his back in a dramatic, anticipatory stretch. His whiskers, long and white against his tawny fur, trembled at the promise of his favorite treat. "Easy there, big fella," Jack chuckled, his deep voice filling the cozy kitchen. "You'd think we hadn't fed you in a week." When Emily offered him a bite of steamed green beans mixed into his main meal, a recommendation from their vet for extra fiber, he didn't swat or recoil. Instead, he leaned forward and nibbled it gently from her fingers, proving that even a soul born to the wild could appreciate a well-balanced, lovingly prepared breakfast. Between joyful, noisy crunches and adorable little head tilts that sent his ear tufts bobbing, Spud's golden, almond-shaped eyes gleamed with pure contentment. Above his head, Jack and Emily exchanged proud, weary smiles. This was a bobcat thriving, a small miracle unfolding right on their countertop. But just 8 weeks ago, Spud's world wasn't one of salmon oil and gentle cooing. It was a cold, dark, and terrifying void. His story didn't begin in their warm kitchen, but deep in the ancient, misty hollows of the Cherokee National Forest. Jack Thompson had always found his church in the woods, not for the sport of the hunt itself, but for the profound solitude and the language of the wilderness that he'd spent 60 years learning to understand. His annual solo camping trip was a sacred ritual, a time to shed the skin of the modern world and reconnect with the rhythm of the earth. This year, he'd pushed deeper than usual into a tract of old-growth forest where the hemlocks stood like silent giants, and the only paths were the ones forged by deer. It was the third morning of his trip. The pre-dawn air was cold and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine. A thick fog clung to the forest floor, muffling all sound. Jack sat by the embers of his campfire, nursing a cup of gritty cowboy coffee when he heard it. It wasn't a sound that belonged. Not a bird, not the chatter of a squirrel, not the rustle of a raccoon. It was a thin, desperate cry, a high-pitched mewling that was almost lost in the vast silence. It was a sound of pure, undiluted misery. A hunter's instinct is a sharp and complex thing. It told him the sound was from a kitten, but it was too reedy for a domestic cat, too forlorn. His heart sank. A kitten in this part of the forest meant one of two things. It was a bobcat or a lynx, and it was alone. And if it was alone, it was dying. He knew from experience that a mother bobcat would never leave her young for long unless she had met a tragic end. A predator, a fall, a hunter's mistake. He stood up, his coffee forgotten. "Hello?" he called out softly, his voice feeling like an intrusion in the sacred quiet. The mewing answered him, weaker this time, but closer. He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes scanning the forest floor. He followed the sound past a moss-covered boulder, around a thicket of rhododendron, and toward the base of a colossal ancient oak tree. The tree was hollowed out at its base, a dark, gaping wound in the trunk. The sound was coming from inside. Jack knelt, the damp leaves soaking through the knees of his canvas trousers. He peered into the darkness of the hollow. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a tiny movement. Curled into a tight, trembling ball at the back of the hollow were two kittens. One was horrifyingly still. The other, the one who had cried out, lifted a tiny, wobbly head. Its fur was matted and thin, its ribs a terrifying xylophone beneath the skin. Its eyes, barely open, were clouded with sickness and starvation. It let out one more heart-wrenching mewl, a sound that seemed to take every last ounce of its strength. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He reached in slowly with a gloved hand. The kitten didn't hiss or spit. It just trembled, a fragile leaf in a storm. He gently checked the other one first, a grim duty he felt he owed it. It was cold and stiff. He had been too late for that one. A wave of sorrow and anger washed over him, sorrow for the loss, and a hot, protective anger on behalf of the survivor. "All right, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's get you out of here." He carefully scooped the living kitten into his hands. It weighed almost nothing. It was a mere handful of bones and fur and a faintly beating heart. It was so weak it couldn't even hold its head up. He cradled it against his chest, trying to impart some of his own body heat into its frigid form. He knew its chances were slim to none. It was severely dehydrated, starved, and likely suffering from hypothermia. Every logical part of his outdoorsman brain told him it was a lost cause. But looking down at the tiny, pathetic creature in his hands, logic had no place. He saw a flicker of life, a desperate will to survive that had made it call out into the void. And he, Jack Thompson, had been the one to hear it. He couldn't turn his back on that. He worked quickly. He unzipped his fleece-lined day pack, carefully placing the kitten inside, nestled amongst a spare wool sweater. He abandoned his campsite, packing only the essentials. He had to get to a place with cell service, and he had to do it now. The journey back to the trailhead was an 8-mile hike, and he did it in a state of focused adrenaline, his every step a prayer. He moved faster than he had in years, his mind a whirlwind of what-ifs. With every step, he imagined the tiny life fading away in his pack. He would stop every 15 minutes, his heart pounding to peek inside. The kitten was always there, still breathing, its small body rising and falling in a shallow, almost imperceptible rhythm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the ridge that marked the edge of the deep wilderness. He pulled out his phone. 1 bar of service. He stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger, dialing the number he knew better than his own. Emily answered on the second ring. "Jack? Is everything all right? You're not supposed to be back for 2 more days?" "Em," he said, his voice ragged with exertion and emotion. "I'm coming home, and I'm bringing someone with me. You need to get the laundry room ready. We're going to need blankets, a heating pad, and get out the old syringes from when we had to give Daisy her medicine. The really small ones." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Emily knew her husband. She knew the sound of his voice when something was truly wrong or truly important. "Jack, what did you find?" He looked down at the day pack, where the faintest of movements told him the kitten was still fighting. "I found a baby, Em. A bobcat, I think. And he's in a bad way, a real bad way." The Thompson laundry room had never seen such a flurry of focused activity. It was transformed from a place of domestic chore into a makeshift wildlife ICU. Emily, who had volunteered at an animal shelter for over a decade before retiring, moved with the calm, efficient grace of a seasoned professional. She had laid down a thick pile of clean, soft towels in a large dog crate, with a heating pad set on low tucked safely underneath a layer of blankets to create a warm, protected nest. A small bowl of water with a few drops of electrolyte solution sat in the corner, though she knew the kitten was far too weak to drink on its own. When Jack burst through the door, his face etched with worry, she was ready. He gently, reverently, lifted the kitten from his day pack and placed him in the prepared crate. Seeing him up close, under the bright lights of the laundry room, was even more shocking. He was a skeleton. His fur was patchy, and his eyes were sealed shut with a crust of infection. He was terrifyingly still. "Oh, Jack!" Emily breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, that poor, poor baby." For a moment, they both stood there, a heavy silence hanging in the room. The task before them seemed monumental, the kitten's chances infinitesimal. But then Emily's training kicked in. She snapped on a pair of latex gloves. "All right," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the despair. "No time for tears yet. Let's see what we can do." What followed was a grueling, sleepless 48 hours. Their world shrank to the 4 walls of the laundry room and the fragile life within it. Every 2 hours, around the clock, they would gently wake the kitten. Emily would carefully clean his eyes with a warm, damp cloth until finally he could blink them open. They were a dull, unfocused gold. Then came the feeding. It was a painstaking process. The kitten was too weak to suckle, so they had to use a 1 cubic centimeter syringe filled with a specialized kitten milk replacer, warmed to a precise temperature. Jack would hold the tiny creature, his large, calloused hands forming a secure and gentle cradle. Emily would take the syringe and carefully squeeze a single drop of milk onto the kitten's lips. For the first few feedings, nothing happened. The milk just dribbled down his chin. They would wipe it away, their hearts sinking a little lower each time. "He's not taking it, Em," Jack said, his voice heavy with defeat, sometime around 3 in the morning on that first night. "We just have to keep trying," Emily insisted, her own eyes gritty with exhaustion. "His body has started to shut down. We have to convince it to start back up again." And then, a tiny miracle. On the 5th or 6th attempt, as Emily squeezed a drop of milk onto his lips, a minuscule pink tongue flickered out and licked it away. It was a reflex more than a conscious action, but it was enough. A jolt of hope shot through both of them. They exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement that their fight was not in vain. Slowly, painstakingly, drop by drop, they got milk into him. They celebrated every swallow like a victory. They worked in shifts. While one of them administered the feeding, the other would prepare the next syringe, clean the bedding, or simply stand watch, their presence a silent vigil. Jack, who normally slept like a log, found himself wide awake each night, his ear tuned to the faintest sound from the laundry room. He would sit in a chair by the crate, just watching the kitten's chest for the reassuring rise and fall of breath. By the 3rd day, there was a noticeable change. The kitten's mewing when they woke him for a feeding had a bit more strength to it. He was still impossibly skinny, but the terrifying skeletal look was beginning to soften. He started to lick the milk from the syringe with a flicker of actual enthusiasm. It was on that day that he earned his name. Jack was holding him, post-feeding, gently stroking his back with one finger. The kitten, feeling the warmth and security, let out a tiny rumbling sound. It wasn't quite a purr. It was more like a sputtering little engine trying to start. "Well, I'll be," Jack said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Listen to that, Em. He sounds like a little spud." He'd always called small, tough things puds. The name stuck. Spud's recovery became the sole focus of their lives. They charted his weight gain in grams on a notepad stuck to the refrigerator. They celebrated the first time he wobbled to his feet on his own, the first time he managed to groom his own face, the first time his purr sputter turned into a genuine rumbling purr that vibrated through Jack's entire hand. As his strength grew, so did his personality. The dullness in his golden eyes was replaced by a bright, mischievous spark. He began to explore his crate, batting at the towels and pouncing on imaginary foes. The laundry room was no longer a hospital, it was becoming a nursery. And Jack and Emily Thompson, a quiet retired couple, had become the unlikely devoted parents to a wild bobcat. As weeks turned into a month, Spud's world expanded beyond the laundry room. His wobbly first steps turned into confident, bounding leaps. His tiny, mewling cries were replaced by a comical assortment of chirps, growls, and loud, demanding murrows that echoed through the small house. The Thompson household, once a bastion of quiet predictability, was now a playground for a force of nature in miniature. And it was hilariously, wonderfully chaotic. The vacuum cleaner, a beige upright that had served them faithfully for years, was declared public enemy number 1. The first time Emily turned it on, Spud, who had been snoozing peacefully in a patch of sunlight, shot straight up into the air, all 4 paws off the ground, his back arched like a Halloween cat. He landed in a crouch, his ears flat against his head, and let out a hiss that was far more impressive than his small size would suggest. From that day on, vacuuming became a two-person job. Jack had to distract Spud with a feather wand in the living room, while Emily undertook a series of lightning-fast cleaning sorties in the other rooms. Then there was the incident with the Sunday paper. Jack liked to spread the paper out on the living room floor, a habit from a lifetime of reading. Spud saw this not as a source of news and information, but as the most magnificent crinkly landscape he had ever encountered. He would launch surprise ambushes from under the coffee table, pouncing on the stock market page with the ferocity of a seasoned hunter taking down a deer. He would stalk the lifestyle section, his little hind end wiggling, before executing a perfect dive roll that would send coupons and comics flying across the room. Jack eventually gave up and started reading his news on a tablet, much to Spud's disappointment. But Spud's greatest adversary, his Moby Dick, was his own reflection. He discovered it one afternoon in the shiny chrome door of the dishwasher. He was trotting past when he caught a glimpse of a handsome spotted bobcat kitten. He stopped dead in his tracks. He puffed up his fur to make himself look bigger, a strategy that the bobcat in the reflection expertly mirrored. Spud let out a low, guttural growl. The other bobcat growled back, silently and with equal menace. This could not stand. He launched himself at the dishwasher door with a mighty thump, only to find his foe had vanished. He would spend hours patrolling the kitchen, periodically checking the dishwasher, the oven door, and the toaster, ever vigilant for the return of his silent, insolent twin. Their life began to revolve around a bobcat proofing routine. Anything remotely dangly, like the cords for the window blinds, had to be tied up high. Spud saw them as personal jungle vines. He'd get himself tangled in them, hanging there, looking utterly baffled, until one of them came to rescue him, his purring starting the moment their hands touched him. Houseplants were moved to the highest shelves after he decided that excavating the potting soil was his true calling. Jack's favorite pair of worn leather slippers were no longer his. They were Spud's most prized kill and were regularly stalked, pounced on, and dragged under the sofa to their doom. The biggest challenge, however, was keeping Spud a secret. Their small community was tight-knit, and they had a particularly curious neighbor, Martha Higgins, a woman whose powers of observation could rival a satellite. Martha had a habit of popping over unannounced. The Spud drill was born out of sheer necessity. The moment they saw Martha's car pull into her driveway next door, one of them would yell, "Incoming!" and it was all hands on deck. Jack would scoop up a purring, protesting Spud and deposit him in the laundry room with a treat, while Emily would do a frantic sweep of the house, hiding the feather wands, the tiny raw meat-smeared bowls, and any slippers that had been recently murdered. One afternoon, Martha caught them off guard. She knocked on the back door just as Spud was in the middle of a frantic chase after a sunbeam on the kitchen floor. Jack, panicking, scooped him up and shoved him gently into the pantry just as he opened the door. "Jack, dear," Martha chirped, holding a plate of cookies. "I baked too many, and I know how much you love my snickerdoodles." "Martha, how thoughtful," Jack said, trying to act casual while his heart hammered against his ribs. Suddenly, from behind the pantry door, came a loud, distinct thump crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of a bag of rice hitting the floor and bursting open. Martha's eyes widened. Goodness, what was that? Jack's mind raced. "Rats," he blurted out. "Big ones. Been having a terrible problem with them. Huge. The size of a small cat, really." Martha looked horrified. "Oh, you poor dears. You must call an exterminator immediately." "On it, Martha, on it," Jack said, practically herding her back out the door. Thanks for the cookies." He closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. He opened the pantry to find Spud sitting placidly in the middle of a mountain of white rice, looking incredibly pleased with himself. A single grain of rice stuck to his nose. Jack just looked at him, and then he started to laugh, a deep, rolling belly laugh that brought Emily running. The sight of her husband covered in sweat and their Bobcat covered in rice was so absurd that she started laughing too. In that moment, surrounded by the mess and the mild panic, they were happier than they had been in years. The laughter, however, always carried a faint undercurrent of anxiety. The close call with Martha Higgins was a stark reminder of their precarious situation. They were living on borrowed time. Jack, the lifelong outdoorsman, knew better than anyone that a bobcat was not a house cat. Spud was growing. His paws seemed to get bigger every day, his teeth sharper, his pounces more powerful. They loved him with a fierce, protective love, but they knew, deep down, that their home wasn't the right long-term answer. The question of, what's next, hung in the air, unspoken but ever present. The turning point came not from a nosy neighbor, but from Jack himself. He was watching Spud one evening. The kitten was crouched behind the armchair, his entire body focused on a dust bunny skittering in a draft. His muscles were coiled, his eyes were narrowed, and for a fleeting moment, Jack didn't see the goofy kitten who chased sunbeams. He saw a wild predator. He saw the animal Spud was born to be, and a profound sadness and sense of responsibility settled over him. "Em," he said quietly, his voice heavy. "We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to him." Emily looked up from her knitting, her expression somber. She had been thinking the same thing. "I know," she whispered. "He deserves a better future than hiding in our pantry. But Jack, what do we do? If we call animal control, they'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Spud being taken away, put in a cage at a shelter or worse, was unbearable. They spent that night researching, their laptops glowing in the dark living room. They looked up wildlife rehabilitators, sanctuaries, and state laws. The news was disheartening. Releasing a bobcat that had been hand-reared and habituated to humans was a death sentence. He didn't know how to hunt, and he wasn't afraid of people, a dangerous combination. Keeping him was illegal without a slew of permits they had no hope of acquiring. It felt like a trap. Every option led to a heartbreaking conclusion. Finally, in the wee hours of the morning, Emily found a small, privately funded wildlife sanctuary 3 hours away, in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. It was run by a man named Dr. Abram Bennett, a retired wildlife biologist who specialized in rehabilitating native predators. His website was filled with pictures of bears, foxes, and, yes, bobcats, living in large, naturalistic enclosures. The site had a clear, compassionate philosophy: to provide a permanent, dignified home for wild animals that could not be returned to the wild. "This is it, Jack," Emily said, her voice filled with a fragile hope. "This is our best chance." Making the call was one of the hardest things Jack had ever had to do. His hand trembled as he dialed the number. He explained the whole story, from the moment he heard the mewling in the forest to the rice incident in the pantry. He expected a lecture, a scolding for interfering with nature. Instead, Dr. Bennett's voice was calm and understanding. "Mr. Thompson," he said, after Jack had finished his tale, "what you and your wife have done is extraordinary. You saved that kitten's life. Most people wouldn't have bothered. Now let's figure out how we can do right by him for the rest of it. The drive to the sanctuary was the quietest trip the Thompsons had ever taken. Spud, sensing their somber mood, was uncharacteristically calm in his carrier, letting out only the occasional soft chirp. Both Jack and Emily felt a profound sense of grief, as if they were heading to a funeral. They were giving up their little boy, the creature who had brought so much chaos and laughter into their quiet lives. The sanctuary was beautiful, set in a rolling valley surrounded by forested hills. Dr. Bennett met them at the gate. He was a tall, lean man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. He didn't immediately try to take Spud. Instead, he invited them into his office and listened as they recounted their story again, this time filling in the details. The vacuum cleaner wars, the slipper slaying, the way Spud would curl up on Jack's chest and purr himself to sleep. Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. He's what we call human imprinted. Releasing him would be irresponsible. You were right about that. He wouldn't survive. So you'll take him? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. I will, Dr. Bennett said gently. We have a large wooded enclosure with another non-releasable female bobcat. He'd have companionship, trees to climb, space to roam. It's the best life we can offer an animal like him. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. This was the right thing to do, the logical thing. But it hurt like a raw wound. Dr. Bennett seemed to read his mind. I want to show you something, he said. He led them out to the enclosure. It was a huge chain-link fenced area, at least an acre in size, filled with trees, boulders, and a small stream. In the distance, they could see another bobcat, sleek and beautiful, sunning herself on a high ledge. This is where he would live, Dr. Bennett said. But our facility runs on donations and volunteers. We're always in need of people who understand these animals, people who are willing to help with feeding, cleaning, enrichment. He paused, looking directly at them. We have a special volunteer program for patrons who sponsor a specific animal. They get unlimited visitation rights. They become part of the animal's permanent care team. A sliver of light pierced through the fog of their sadness. You mean we could still see him? Emily asked, her eyes filling with tears. See him? Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Bennett said with a small smile. If you're willing, I'd be counting on you to help prepare his meals. No one knows what he likes better than you do. The decision was made before they even had to speak. It was a perfect, heartbreaking, and heartwarming solution. They weren't losing Spud. Their role was just changing. They were graduating from being secret parents to being official patrons and caretakers. Saying goodbye that first day was still agony. Jack carried the carrier to the enclosure's entrance. He knelt down and opened the door. Spud hesitated for a moment, looking back at him with his wide, golden eyes. Jack reached in and gave him one last scratch behind the ears. Go on now, big fella, he whispered, his voice cracking. Go be a bobcat. Spud stepped out onto the soft earth, looked around at the trees and the stream, and with a flick of his tufted ears, he trotted off to explore his new, bigger world. The story didn't end there, of course. It began a new chapter. Twice a week, every week, Jack and Emily would make the 3-hour drive to the sanctuary. They became Dr. Bennett's most dedicated volunteers. Emily would be in the food prep kitchen, carefully mixing Spud's veterinarian-approved diet of rabbit and quail, adding his salmon oil and even chopping up a few green beans just the way he liked. Jack would help with enclosure maintenance, but his real job was sitting on the bench just outside the fence. Spud never forgot them. As soon as he saw their car pull up, he would come trotting over to the fence, chirping and rubbing against the wire mesh in the exact spot where Jack was sitting. He would sit there, purring his loud, sputtering purr, while Jack spoke to him in a low, gentle voice, telling him about his week, about the rogue squirrel that was raiding the bird feeder, and about how much they missed his chaos. One crisp autumn afternoon, they were there for their visit. The air was cool, the leaves were a riot of red and gold, and Spud was looking magnificent. His coat was thick and healthy, his muscles were lean and strong from climbing, and his eyes shone with a confident, wild light. He was happy. He was thriving. And as Jack and Emily stood there, watching the impossible creature they had raised from a skeletal scrap of fur, their hearts weren't filled with sadness or loss. They were filled with a profound, quiet joy. Their little alarm clock was gone, the house was neater, and the slippers were safe. But their lives were infinitely richer. They had heard a cry for help in the vastness of the forest, and in answering it, they had found a new kind of family, a wild, wonderful, and enduring love that bridged the gap between two very different worlds, all thanks to a tiny, stubborn bobcat named Spud,